We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America on this post-Thanksgiving broadcast, November 30th, 2019. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. And it's good to have you with us once again. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
Trying to think of something profound to say. Nothing's coming to mind.
Well, it's a little early to be.
Yeah, I don't think the coffee's kicked in just yet. I do have to start the broadcast off on a little bit of a somber note, however. And that somber note is, I learned this past week, many of the listeners of this audience will remember Jackie Petru. Jackie Petru is a longtime Patriot broadcaster. In fact, she was my first foray into the movement. She had her shortwave show, Sweet Liberty. In fact, the website, sweetliberty.org, was one of the first websites I ever built. I built it with her, and so that's still online. I will say Jackie suffered a significant setback this past week. And I'm just going to share a note that I got from Eleanor White, who's been a guest on this show, and has been a good friend of Jackie Petru's over the years as well, a mutual friend. She emailed me this past week, and she was asking me, she says, I haven't heard from Jackie in a while, have you? And I said, no, I come to think of it, I haven't heard from her either. I said, have you tried to call her? Well, apparently after I emailed that, she did try to call her. I got this note back from her. She says, over the past year or so, I noticed that in spite of all sorts of newsworthy geopolitical events, I hadn't heard anything from Jackie Petru, who formerly hosted the show Sweet Liberty. No email response asking how she is, so today I tried her Milton, Pennsylvania telephone number. A message gave me an up-to-date contact number. At about 2 p.m. Eastern today, and that was November 26, Jackie answered, though with a fair bit of difficulty. Her first words were, she wondered how I managed to get through to her. With hesitations, she explained that she is now with her daughters in St. Louis and has had a stroke, followed by a heart attack. Before she could say anything further, another call came and mine was dropped. Because of her difficulty speaking, I did not try again, and probably will not unless I hear that she is in better shape and ready to communicate. For information of those who may have appreciated her radio and information bulletin service to our cause, praying for you, Jackie, Eleanor White, Ontario, Canada. So I would just encourage people to remember Jackie Petru in your prayers. I was completely unaware. In fact, I thank Eleanor for noticing this absence of correspondence and and following through to find out what happened. So Jackie is suffering some health setbacks, and so we ask that you all remember her in your prayers. She was one of the first ones when I got involved in this. I woke up, I think, about 96, and I always kind of knew something was wrong, but as far as discovering Patriot Radio is concerned, right around 1996, I would say, I was working at a commercial television station and discovered there was a satellite guide sitting there, and I discovered there was radio on some of them satellite channels. So I decided to go through and start tuning into some of them, and well, lo and behold, one of them was Republic Radio International, John Statmiller's original network, back when he was here in Michigan, and Jackie had a show on Republic Radio. So that's how I started listening. That's how I became aware of her, and you know what I used to do? I used to bring a VCR tape into work and record, for my entire shift, Patriot Radio, and then I would take it home and listen to it. And that was the pre-internet days, at least. Well, the internet was in its infancy. I certainly didn't have internet or a computer. And from there, we ended up going on to fax networks and everything else. So, and eventually, and right around, I think sometime in 98 or 99, I can't remember exactly, I decided, because when I finally did get a computer, I got into website building and stuff, and I wanted to be able to practice. So I contacted Jackie. I said, I noticed you don't have a website. Would you like me to build one for you? And so we started working together. And so I did that kind of to get some experience in practicing websites. And some of the pages on Sweet Liberty, you can tell, are kind of primitive, shall we say, especially by today's standards. But anyway, so
she had great info out there. I have links to some of her stuff. Yeah, well, she was talking about when I first started listening to her. She was talking about the United Nations and documenting a lot of these documents that we've talked about over the years. So that's, it was actually from her I first heard about Chris Gerner. And so the whole thing just kind of grew from there. So, yeah, mm-hmm. It's interesting to go back down memory lane. Yeah, it is.
But it also kind of makes you a little bit sad as time goes on, and so many people. I'm glad we haven't lost Jackie, but so many people have gone on, and Chris being one of them, and there's just so many that you can name off. It kind of really puts things into perspective that we really are here on Earth for a very limited period of time. So you want to make it count,
and it goes so fast.
Yeah, indeed. So anyway, on a lighter note, I trust you had a good Thanksgiving.
I had a great Thanksgiving, except for the dinner I cooked. I should know better. I do know better. I do know better than to cook. I can't cook. I'm a lousy cook. Well, and so why I take perfectly good ingredients and destroy them, I don't know.
Yeah, I was trying to think of because they talk about them butterball hotlines and some of the horror stories that people have. I always try to tell people when you're cooking a turkey, just remember you got to take something out of each end. Usually that's the case. Don't forget to take it out.
That doesn't sound good, Darren.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I wasn't intending to conjure up bad images in people's mind. So, and also this past week we had an anniversary, the 20-year anniversary of the battle in Seattle, Vicky. Yeah,
I watched that video. When I first saw that, I just, thought it was just like hippies, going back to the 1960s, they're rioting, until a few years later, when I started looking into trade issues and found Lori Wallach and listened to her talk about the trade agreements.
Yes.
And then I understood. And had I known back in 1998?
20 years from now, so it'll be 99, I guess.
Or 99. I would have been out there with them.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. There's nothing like the smell of tear gas in the morning. And, but, yeah, I mean, I joke about it, but the point is those people were mistreated by the police massively. And here's the thing about it. And let me just go ahead and play this introductory, because what people who weren't in the movement or weren't paying attention or weren't even alive back then don't realize is these people, mostly leftist, I would say, were out there fighting for a good cause. They were out there fighting against the World Trade Organization, against the outsourcing of our jobs, against all the globalization that's killing our country, killing our national sovereignty. And I look at what happened 20 years ago with these leftists out there doing a fantastic thing. I mean, and then I compare them to the leftist movement today, which is evidently pro-war, pro-this, but, you're a racist if you like the orange man in the Oval Office. I mean, look at how bad, how far we've come in 20 years, how far they've managed to work on the left to get them off track and protesting wild, insane, nutty ideas that go nowhere.
Well, what happens is that groups or groups like the people in the Battle of Seattle, if they're on top of a really important issue and their position is not what the powers that be want, then somebody, I'm not sure, the CIA, the FBI, they fund insurgents.
Yes.
And the insurgents turn the groups. I remember listening
to
Huey something or other, the founder of the Black Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that when they formed that group, it was with all good intentions. They were nonviolent. But what happened, they had an infiltration of insurgents, and they turned the group bad.
Yeah.
They turned the public against the group.
We've had Larry Pinkney
That's the way they
on the
manipulate
show.
Groups in this country.
Yeah, we've had Larry Pinkney on the show. He was with the original Black Panthers, and he's got a good perspective on things. But yeah, I mean, I think he was railroaded into jail by these agents provocateur, or I don't really know the details of all of that, but yeah, Larry's a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's called Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO. They infiltrate groups, they take them over, and they try to agitate and get them to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, or, I mean, they'll just take and railroad the whole group into prison because guilty by association.
Right, and they turn the public against them by being maximally obnoxious and antisocial.
And what they were worried about back then with the Black Panthers, the original Black Panthers, not this modern thing anymore, but the original Black Panthers group is they were uniting the races. They were bringing people together. And this is how I look at the battle in Seattle. Look at what can happen. Look how many people showed up for that to counter a genuine globalist get-together. They were trying to sign a treaty that would be very detrimental to the United States. I mean, people came out in droves for that, as they should. If there's if there's any place to take a stand, it's against these globalization treaties and pacts. And that's why I'm a little concerned. I was going through some audio from Lori Wallach, but I didn't have time to clip it. I do like Lori Wallach, and I do, she spends a lot of time studying these things, and so I kind of go to her. She's kind of my go-to person to kind of get a feel about what these treaties are, because, I mean, they're so big, they're so monstrous, that nobody could possibly read. I mean, you can read it. I'm not trying to say you can't read it, but you'd have to make that all you do, and And for a 3-hour show where we cover a lot of different things, it's kind of hard to focus on one thing. But you'd have to make that your project for the week or something. So she has made it her one thing, and so she's able to go through and study and read all this stuff. And I kind of rely upon her to kind of get a feel about where these things are at. My impression is. Originally, my impression was it was pretty bad, the follow-up USMCA to NAFTA. Now, this is not the World Trade Organization, by the way. People, I think, get confused. The international trade agreements, some of them are World Trade Organization related, and some of them are not. The NAFTA agreement was outside of the WTO. It is a trilateral trade agreement. I don't think, honestly, I think what happened is the WTO stalled. The WTO stalled, and so they started pursuing these multilateral trade agreements. And frankly, I think bilateral trade agreements, okay, they're fine. We've always done trade with other countries. When you start introducing multiple parties into the same agreement, then you have disparaging levels of wealth, different levels of skill, different levels of poverty, different standards in terms of your laws and your safety regulations and your environmental standards. And that's the problem is when you start introducing various parties, then you're trying to harmonize across the board and get everybody on the same playing field.
To harmonize with the third world, you have to drop your standards to where they were at the time when you were third world.
Well, you have to either bring them up, and how are you going to do that? That's not that so easy. You either have to bring them up or you have to come down. And most of the time it's the latter. And if you want to do a trade agreement with a quote unquote partner country, that is relatively like your own, pretty close to your own, that's one thing. I still have a problem with some sovereignty issues because they always use this international tribune to rule how, whenever you have a disagreement. But
okay, let's back up though. Let's don't call them trade agreements. We've got to get them a different name because they are not trade agreements. Mm-hmm. What they are harmonization agreements to build a body of international law. Mm-hmm. That's what they are. And so they use the term trade agreement to fool us, to trick us. And that's a fact.
Yeah.
Since they first started having these rounds, they call them trade rounds.
Yeah.
But it's always been about making the laws the same so that there could be a borderless world for commerce.
It is. Yes, that's what the ultimate goal is, creating international regions across borders, harmonizing laws, regulations, standards, everything, so that ultimately it's the standard regionalization, and ultimately there will be a borderless world in their mind. Now, it's not going very well, Vicky. It hasn't gone. This thing really should have been done by now, by their thinking, but it's thankfully enough people have awakened to it and come out against it, and the battle in Seattle, frankly, was part of that.
It was a huge part of it, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. Even if we didn't understand it at the time, they put a monkey wrench in the works.
Yeah, let me just play a little clip from Democracy Now!, which ordinarily I would not probably play a whole lot of clips from Democracy Now!, but they cover this pretty well.
Today we spend the hour looking back at the Battle of Seattle.
When labor and student and environmentalists and human rights activists stand together, we can and did shut down the WTO.
20 years ago this week, tens of thousands of activists gathered in Seattle, Washington to shut down a ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization. Grassroots organizers successfully blocked world leaders, government trade ministers, and corporate executives from meeting to sign a global trade deal that many call deeply undemocratic and harmful to workers' rights, the environment, and indigenous people globally. On November 30th, 1999, those activists formed a human chain around the Seattle Convention Center and shut down the city's downtown.
Police responded by firing tear gas and rubber bullets into the mostly peaceful crowd. And the protest went on for 5 days, resulted in over 600 arrests and the eventual collapse of the talks, as well as the resignation of Seattle's police chief. The protests were documented in the film This Is What Democracy Looks Like.
You've got people here from all over. You got labor, you got environmentalists, you got teachers, you've got children, you've got coalitions between people of color and you know, mainstream white Americans. You've got middle class, you got working poor, you got everybody out here because this hurts people. This is bad for people. It's bad for our jobs here. It's bad for the people over there.
In the documentary, This Is What Democracy Looks Like, organizers Hop Hopkins and Rice Baker Yaboa talked about the brutality protesters face in the streets of Seattle.
There was so much fear coming out of Tuesday. I mean, we had been shot at. We had been gassed. People had been beaten and shot. You know, people didn't expect that going into Tuesday. And people had to recommit themselves and reaffirm their position.
That night, we ended up meeting up on the corner of Broadway and John and decided about what we were going to do the next day. The next day, we'd meet up at 6:30 at Denny Park, and then we'd try to take back the city. We started to weave our way through the roadblocks that they had set up, and I looked around. I could see people were afraid, and at that point I said, you know, that's really not fear in your gut or in your throat. That's really your first taste of freedom. People were coming out of nowhere. I mean, it was like a scene from that Michael Jackson video Thriller. People were like coming out of manholes. People were coming out of cars. So we went from like 50 people to like 100 people to like 150 people to like 300 people. And then just the numbers just kept growing. I don't know where all these people came from. And I think the cops were totally surprised by that.
So that's exciting. And we need more of that. But it's not surprising that the other side has worked so hard in these last 20 years to keep people divided. The media has been stirring the pot because they don't want protests like that against something that's genuinely being pushed as a globalist initiative.
Mm-hmm. They really don't want people to understand what the issues are.
Yeah.
And so if you have anybody out there calling things what they really are rather than using the mush-mouth terms that the intellectuals at the think tanks come up with, then they kind of become the enemy also, because, you know, when you call it for what it is, then that kind of blows the whole game, because people kind of, I think, instinctively understand when they're hearing truth as opposed to mush-mouth lies.
Yeah. And we, I mentioned Lori Wallach earlier regarding the USMCA, because Trump is working supposedly to push, well, his initiative was to replace NAFTA, originally to cancel NAFTA, and then it became repeal and replace, just like Obamacare became repeal and replace. And now we have trade ministers that are kind of working on, I guess, fixing the document, trying to deal with some of the problems. There are, Politico says, top officials from the U.S., Mexico, and Canada are close to agreeing to changes to the North American Trade Pact that would allow for House Democrats to put the deal up for a vote, Mexico's top trade official said on Wednesday. We're reaching understandings. We're now looking at very specific details, but I think we're headed towards a deal, Mexico Undersecretary for North American Jesus Seed told reporters after meeting for roughly 4 hours during the morning with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. Now, this was the 27th, so this article was just 3 days ago. He says everything looks like it's heading in the right direction. The latest flurry of trilateral engagement comes as Lighthizer works with House Democrats to make changes to the USMCA surrounding the pact's labor, environment, enforcement, and prescription drug provisions. Canada and Mexico both need to agree to any updates to the deal, which the three countries signed a year ago. Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland joined her two counterparts for a 3-day meeting in Washington on Wednesday evening. Two of her top deputies, acting U.S. Ambassador Kirsten Hillman and Canada's chief NAFTA negotiator Steve Verhall, joined the meeting. Seed and Freeland left the headquarters of the Office of U.S. Trade Representative on Wednesday evening without announcing a breakthrough, but both officials indicated that they will remain in discussions in the coming days to wrap up a deal that the House could vote on soon. Neither would speculate on the lifetime for striking a deal. Anyway, it goes on from there. The point is that they're apparently still working out details, and, you know, as I mentioned Lori Wallach earlier, she said that they're trying to improve things. I genuinely hope they do, but I'm always nervous about these trade agreements because this is something that the country's going to get stuck with, and I really don't like trilateral or multilateral trade agreements.
Well, they're trying to create a region with those agreements.
Well, that's what they did with NAFTA.
Okay, let's take the break now.
All right, let's take the break. We'll be back in a moment, folks. This is Govern America. GovernAmerica.com and TheTechnocraticTyranny.com are the websites, and we'll be back here in just a few.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
And we're back. This is Govern America. Vicky Davis is here. I'm Darren Weeks. As we continue on here, the website for the show is governamerica.com. That's governamerica.com. And the toll-free number is 844-646-8376 if you got anything you'd like to add. Or you can call 610-600-1776, 610-600-1776, or toll-free 844-646-8376. Vicky, you want to give out your website?
Yeah, my website is www.thetechnocratictyranny.com. And I have an older one. It's called Channeling Reality.
All right.
Search there, too.
Channelingreality.com. I think the Skype got you a little bit.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Hey, I just looked something up, and I don't know why, but I didn't put the date on this, but I have the Vandenberg Amendment here, the Vandenberg Resolution that was passed sometime after we joined the United Nations. Mm-hmm. And the intent of the Vandenberg Resolution was to supplant the U.S. Constitution with international treaties. Okay, I'm going to read it. It's pretty short.
Okay.
Resolved that the Senate reaffirm the policy of the United States to achieve international peace and security through the United Nations, so that armed force shall not be used except in the common interest, and that the President be advised of the sense of the Senate that this government, by constitutional process, should particularly pursue the following objectives within the United Nations Charter. Number 1, progressive development of regional and other collective arrangements for individual and collective self-defense in accordance with the principles of the provisions of the Charter. And the next one, association of the United States by constitutional process with such regional and other collective arrangements as are based on continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, and as affect its national security.
Yeah.
So they intended to use the treaty power of the Senate to involve us in these regional associations and to work through the United Nations, which is surrendering our sovereignty to the United Nations.
Absolutely it is, and that's what the whole purpose of it is. That's what the whole purpose of the United Nations was to begin with when it was, established, and its forerunner, the League of Nations. They build upon the foundation they lay, but yeah, the whole thing is designed to rob and under the guise of peace, and it's not even a peaceful thing anymore. There's nothing peace driven about it. They make war everywhere they go. And they call it waging peace.
Because their objective is to eliminate the nation state and replace it with a regional organization, which we have to call it like it is. It's a union, like the Soviet Union, like the European Union, the North American Union, the African
Union. Yeah. Exactly, and the thing, and all the people, and as I read these get-togethers they have, there's something called the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I've talked about it many times on the broadcast. You can go in and look and read their minutes, their meeting minutes that they have, and they have meetings on everything from the oceans and the desert, everything that you can imagine. How to treat wildlife and, because what they're doing is they're having these negotiations and they're negotiating away they're forming pacts and agreements, and you never hear about these things. Climate is just one of them. Trade is one that we hear a lot about because it affects so many people as far as jobs are concerned. But you don't hear about these negotiations going on constantly behind the scenes for different things related to the environment, different things related to the biosphere, every little
forests,
thing.
everything.
The forests, yes,
absolutely
mountains.
Everything.
They have these agreements.
Decisions, these collective, these groups, these nonprofits, and you kind of have to do a little bit of study to find the key nonprofits, ones that are...
Yes, and the nonprofits are just part of it, but there's governments involved. They send the government representatives there. But, the reason why I brought that up is because every time I see the European Union or the African Union, they have one representative there for the whole bloc.
Yes.
They don't have the individual countries represented. They have one person there for the bloc. Or one delegation, maybe I should say. I mean, it may be more than one person, but one entity representing that bloc. They don't get several individual votes. And I maintain the United States, if we have to participate in this nonsense, we should have 50. Because we have 50 sovereign states here. At least we did at one time until they acquiesced and gave away their authority to the federal government.
Well, they
taking
will
bribes.
They'll be putting an end to that too.
Yeah.
To states, because states are defined under the Constitution on a jurisdictional basis, and that's what they're trying to eliminate. And so, actually, within a country, they are defining regions. The term regions should apply to an area within a country like ours, where we have the Pacific Northwest Economic Region that includes Washington, Idaho, I don't know if it's Montana or Wyoming, but anyway, and a couple of the British provinces. The idea is it's a borders war to violate the law of the land that's based on geographical jurisdiction. To basically lift the law into the global sphere.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a sovereignty robbing situation, robbing sovereignty from the states. And that's what regionalism is all about, laying a layer of governance across borders. And again, just like the NAFTA agreement, harmonizing things within that region to create a little governance zone. And notice I'm using the word governance, not government, because it takes away from the legitimate government sovereignty, which then, it's a transfer of that sovereignty to the regional entity. And there's the problem. And it all goes back to Nixon. We talked about this before. Nixon started the 10 federal regions in the executive order. He pulled the federal government into the backyards of the American people by setting up these 10 federal regions, which still exist today, by the way. They're still using the same regions. FEMA uses the same regions. There's other federal agencies I've noticed use the same federal regions, and they have capitals. And this is why I talk, at the beginning of the show, live from FEMA regions 5 and 10, because we're 5 here, you're 10 where you are, Vicky, and it's to try to raise awareness, not to create legitimacy for it, but to raise awareness that this is a real thing. And people don't realize how they've been robbed. When you have somebody in Chicago, in my case, who is making decisions for your region, we haven't been told about these regions. We haven't been made aware that they exist. Who do we call who do we call for a redress of grievances? Who do we call?
Yeah.
And how do we get them to listen to us? I mean, it's hard enough to get the politicians to listen to you. Some bureaucrat and a regional bureaucrat's going to listen to you. And then it is not just the 10 federal regions, but there's local regions as well. We have regions here in Michigan overlapping.
Lifting the jurisdictions into collectivist organizations across the board. We have economic development districts, which, in our states, the one that I'm in has about 6 counties in it. Mm-hmm. And the federal government funds programs through those economic development districts, basically bypassing the states. Our states have ceded sovereignty also.
Yes.
And so it's like, we're sitting here and we think we have an idea of how our government works. That's totally wrong. That's totally wrong. That's just what's printed in the books.
Well, you first have to have
jurisdictions go. But when you're talking about really the operation of your state, it's totally different.
Yeah, you first have to have an operational idea of what you're dealing with when you say the word government. Because if you're really dealing with the government, that's one thing. But when you're dealing with this regional body that is working to undermine and overthrow, you've got elected officials in your city council that engage in things like revenue sharing with other districts, other governmental bodies, and they're sharing police departments and they're sharing different resources. It all starts to blur. It all starts to blur. And I understand, the government, the federal government, and things have been made to the point where poverty has gripped our land, despite what people say. Oh, we got a robust economy and everything's going really well, and look how much money people are making. Well, the problem is that it's not really true on the ground, and a lot of the districts and governmental entities on a local level are struggling. They're having a hard time, and during times of struggle, they do what they can to survive, and that helps lend itself to revenue sharing programs and things like that end up lending itself more to this regionalism.
Right. Well, every time you take money from the federal government, it always comes with strings.
Absolutely.
Always. And so you give up sovereignty. And if your public officials are engaged in a collectivist organization like the economic development districts, they are ceding their sovereignty to the group organization. So if you have 6 counties in an economic development district, your county representative that's on the board of that regional district has diluted his power. He's transferred his power, and his vote is only one vote in the 6. One vote out of the 6. So he doesn't really have any power anymore. It has been given away. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, moving along here, we have another thing that has developed. We got this impeachment scenario going on behind the scenes, and quite honestly, I think that the Democrats have painted themselves into a corner. To be honest with you, if they go forward with this thing, it's going to, well, let me just say it this way: if they don't go forward with it, then everything that they've told their base is going to make their base very angry, because all of a sudden now, well, you've brought us this far, why abandon it? Despite the fact that the testimony, we played clips on the show in previous weeks, despite the fact that the testimony clearly indicates they've got nothing. They have nothing. Even when it looked like they had something, it turned out to be nothing. It was a perception. And so, but their base haven't bothered to watch the 7 and 8 hour hearings to see that they have nothing. They rely on MSNBC to tell them the truth, and CNN to tell them the truth, and they lie constantly, even in the face of blatant evidence, blatant reality. That's the la-la's land. So anyway, the stories they've been told. And now if the Democrats move forward with the impeachment, then their base is going, or if they don't move forward, then their base is going to be angry. If they do move forward, then they got to face the trial in the Senate, where the Republicans can subpoena documents and, get, the chalupas, in there to testify. And the whole thing's going to be a big disaster for them, potentially, unless they can fix it somehow. So I don't see how they can. Yeah. You're right. They have backed themselves into a corner.
So this is going to be interesting to watch. And frankly, I don't care if he gets impeached or not. Honestly, I think he's going to be reelected either way.
Yeah, it won't matter because it's such
Yeah, complete nonsense. Anyway, so we got this, one of the people that were testifying is William Taylor. And it came out this past week now, and I know you're familiar with this, I think. He was the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Apparently, he's got ties to, the Atlantic Council. And, it's kind of interesting that, let me just play this clip. This is from Fox News. This is Trish Regan. And I'm not really I don't really like this because she makes it like it's such a big deal. And it is kind of a big deal because it is a conflict of interest, if it's true. But at the same time, it's not like this doesn't happen in Washington every day.
I want to get right now to a developing story. Just when you thought the deep state couldn't get any deeper, what do you know? We get reports tonight linking members of Adam Schiff's team to that sketchy energy company out of Ukraine, Burisma, the one that paid all that money to Hunter Biden. According to reports in the Washington Examiner as well as Breitbart, 2 of Adam Schiff's team members worked at something called the Atlantic Council, which was a think tank, which Breitbart says is funded by this Ukrainian company, Burisma. Okay, so think about that. A couple of Schiff team members worked at a think tank that allegedly, reportedly, was funded by Burisma. And it gets worse, because there are also reports now that the alleged whistleblower worked with one of Schiff's team members at the National Security Council. And what do you know? As soon as Schiff's team member went over to Capitol Hill, when he left the NSC, suddenly that report from the whistleblower got filed. This does not look very good. But hey, you know what? We've known all along this ain't pretty, right? Joining me right now, Bush 43 Senior Advisor Brad Blakeman. Brad, good to see you. All right, let's dissect this. We're going to get to the whistleblower in a second. But first of all, the Atlantic Council. Breitbart is saying that this is funded in part by Burisma, the Ukrainian company. Does that stuff happen? Do you have foreign companies that are deliberately funding think tanks so that they can effectively get their point of view across in Washington, D.C.
No doubt. And that's part of the swamp. Mm-hmm. And, Washington is an insidious place where it's very incestuous. One minute you're in government, the next minute you're outside in a think tank, then you're back in government. Mm-hmm. And it's a circle that never ends. And I will say that we are complicit. Our enemies know that. Mm-hmm. Our democracy and our laws allow them to do this through 501c4s, not-for-profits. Mm-hmm. Don't have to disclose donors. They have different rules. Mm-hmm. So, shame on us. Mm-hmm. Because we allow this to occur. And
it seems like a conflict, right? I mean, this whole thing is about Burisma and Hunter Biden and Ukraine. And it turns out 2 Schiff staffers allegedly worked for a think tank supported by Burisma.
And this is why they want to keep the whistleblower silent. They want to keep him undisclosed or her undisclosed. That's not going to happen. Eventually, it's going to come out. And you guys are helping. What we need to do is have it come out when it's appropriate to come out because it has an effect on the proceedings that are going on.
Okay, I can't take any more. They make it sound like, okay, first of all, the whistleblower, Eric Charmella. I mean, come on, let's quit pretending like we don't know who this guy is. This is the guy that is being alleged to be the whistleblower. Nobody's allowed to say his name. Now we got to pretend like it might be a girl. I mean, come on. So there's that. And as far as, it's got to be kept secret. Well, you guys at Fox, you could reveal it. I mean, there's no reason why it needs to be kept secret except that you're playing along. And here's the other other problem I got with this, Vicky. They talk like they're acting like this is. I mean, it's a big deal. Don't get me wrong. It's a legitimate conflict of interest. But they're acting like this, oh, my gosh, this never happens. And, you're horrified. Oh, can you believe this? I mean, come on.
It's almost like they're stalling for time.
The Atlantic Council is funded by all kinds of groups, all kinds of organizations, I mean, they are the face of NATO.
Yes.
They are the face of NATO. The Atlantic Council is funded, and all of these military supply companies, like Raytheon and all of these military industrial complex keeps that organization alive, man. But why doesn't Fox News talk about that? It just drives me crazy, because they're drooling all over themselves about this. I mean, it's good they're reporting on it, but don't talk down to the viewer. I guess that's the thing I'm saying, is it drives me crazy because they're just talking down to people. They're acting like we're stupid.
Well, that's why I think they're just stalling for time. It's kind of like just a game, Who is the guy? Guess who's the guy? But don't say his name. I mean, it's stupid. It's just stupid.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize that Burisma was funding the Atlantic Council. I mean, I guess it doesn't really surprise me, but Fox News isn't mentioning anything about Genie Energy and the fact that Rupert Murdoch sits on the Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Energy. So there's a conflict of interest. And Trish Regan and none of them there are ever going to say anything about that because they wouldn't have a job if they revealed that little tidbit of information. And this is why you can never hear the truth about people like Bill Browder from Fox News.
Mm-hmm. It is a conspiracy of our institutions, including the government, a conspiracy against the ordinary people on the ground. It's like they don't want people to really understand what's going on. They want to keep people in this illusion of the United States as it was written in the history books and told in the movies and all of that. And but when you really start reading their documents and figuring out what they've done, it's absolutely the opposite. This is a country I don't recognize.
Right. Yeah, it seems like everything that the establishment media does is strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. They make big deals out of little things. I mean, this is definitely a conflict of interest, but it's a straw man. It's a straw man that doesn't matter. The big enchilada is what I mentioned earlier. You know, if it ever got out that Rupert Murdoch sits on the board of Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Energy, you know, Fox News would lose its audience, I believe. I could be wrong. But I don't think the problem is people are trusting that these outlets are giving them the truth, the unvarnished truth. On the left, you've got MSNBC and CNN. On the right, you've got Fox News. And all of them are lying to you. That's the problem. And unless you're able to have the time to go through and do your own research and discover what's really going on, which does take time because, you know, you have to go through the original documents. You have to go through original hearings. And unless you do that, you do the work, you're going to be completely clueless because they're lying to you. So, and I mean, here's the thing. With all of the Browder stuff, why is this so important? You know, we talk a lot on the show, or we've talked some on the show, probably not enough. But I think we should probably get into it, Vicky. You know, because it's so relevant. Everything that's going on right now with Ukraine, with this whole impeachment fiasco, it all comes down to Mikhail Khodorkovsky, this Russian oligarch who was the wealthiest man in Russia. He was the founder of Minitep, which is a bank and financial group. He gained control of the Siberian oil fields and Yukos Oil, which was the largest oil company in Russia, through this corrupt voucher program back in the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. You know, I've mentioned this before. The Soviet Union collapsed. Boris Yeltsin and his underling, Natalie Chubais, set up this corrupt voucher program, and they were catering to predator Western capitalists who were basically bleeding the country dry. And they transferred a lot of the Russian people's wealth through this corrupt voucher program, bought these things up for pennies on the dollar. They were running or pennies on the ruble. They were running the program. Nobody had any idea where the auctions were. I mean, they cleaned the country dry until Vladimir Putin came in and put a stop to it. They hate his guts now and want to overthrow him because of it. Tell you what, we're at the top of the hour. Let's take the break, and we'll hit the ground running when we come back. Stay with us, folks. This is Govern America.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, here on this 30th of November 2019, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. GovernAmerica.com is the website for the show. That's GovernAmerica.com. My email address is radio@governamerica.com. Vicky, you want to give your email out?
It's eyeswideopen@channelingreality.com. And in the Eyes Wide Open, there's two O's. Eyes Wide OOPEN.
All right, very good.
Channelingreality.com.
And her website is thetechnocratictyranny.com. That's thetechnocratictyranny.com. Make sure you get the in there, or you might end up somewhere completely unrecognizable. And you can get to the other website, her other website from there. So thetechnocratictyranny.com. You know, we're talking about the situation with Bill Browder and Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the looting of Russia back in the 90s, which is relevant today because that's the reason why all of this stuff is going on. The anti-Russian collusion, the anti-Russian allegations of collusion, the anti-Russian, the whole narrative that's been going on for several years, that's plagued this country for years. This is where it's coming from. They want to overthrow the regime in Russia like they're overthrowing every other regime, and they being the military-industrial complex, the intelligence establishment, and the politicians whom they control.
Yeah, it's all for global governance. And you know what, these episodes, if you understand the long-term strategic objective, which is what we just talked about a few minutes ago, which is the unionization and regionalization of territories to replace the nation-state organizations. Privatization of government functions is one of the tactics for regionalization, because they're trying to break the nation-state power. Mm-hmm. Because if you're gonna have a regional organization over the top of what used to be your nation state, you have to break that nation state, and privatization of government assets and government power is the way to do it. I mean, it's cannibalization of the power structure of the nation state.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking before the break about this Russian oligarch, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He was, as I said, he was the wealthiest man in Russia. He had gained control of Yukos oil through shares that he received from the corrupt voucher program, which was set up after the fall of the Soviet Union. People have to realize, after the Soviet Union fell, the Russian people were in squalor. They were living in poverty. They were destitute. And along comes these people from foreigners, but there were also people within the country as well that were preying upon, using this crisis as an opportunity, in true Rahm Emanuel vernacular, to capitalize upon the misery that was taking place. And when you have a communist system and the state is running everything, and then the state all of a sudden becomes inept, everything collapses. They went through and they were doing the privatization program in Russia, and I put the word privatization in quotes, but the whole scheme was privatization. It was a scheme. It was a guise, because what they were really doing is they were privatizing the assets for themselves.
Right. They were gutting the state.
We need to distribute this to the people. And, the only thing that we didn't know is they were the people they were distributing things to.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Very cheap. Very cheap. We're gonna give the people a bargain. Well, they gave away the vouchers. The people didn't realize what they had, and anyway, they were starving. And they just wanted food and vodka, and so they sold these things real cheap. After these people come along and gathered them up, and they auctioned them off in secret auctions to the multi-billionaires, and people like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Larry Summers was involved in it. But the State Department was involved in it, and that was kind of interesting too, because we've got audio that we'll play later on. But this Mikhail Khodorkovsky, he was, he gained control of the Siberian oil fields. He gained control of Yukos oil. He was arrested, and he actually was sentenced to 9 years in Russian prison in 2003 for fraud and tax crimes. And as I mentioned Genie Energy earlier, Genie Energy is the energy company that was tied to Jared Kushner, and also you had Rupert Murdoch sitting on the strategic advisory board of Genie Energy with a guy by the name of Jacob Rothschild. Jacob Rothschild was also a close associate of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. And I think I mentioned previously on another broadcast that Mikhail Khodorkovsky passed his shares. When Khodorkovsky was arrested, he passed his shares off to Jacob Rothschild in Yukos Oil. There's an article.
Yeah, he probably thought Rothschilds needed the money, right?
Well, he couldn't hold on to him, so he had to do something with him. And then he was close enough to Jacob Rothschild that that was the person that he chose to hold on to the shares. There's an article in Life.ru, which was translated into English and appears on stalkerzone.org. It says that the Rothschild Trust directly finance Khodorkovsky's anti-Russian political projects.
Oh,
so
okay.
And then you have things like Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. She was on the staff at the McCain Institute. So there's John McCain involved. You also have Hillary Clinton endorsing Khodorkovsky. In fact, it's on Khodorkovsky's website, Khodorkovsky.com. Quote, I think that all of these problems, the imprisonment of Khodorkovsky, beatings and murders in Russia, are damaging to the image of the country abroad. In all countries, there are criminals and people who abuse their authority. During the last 18 months, however, and even before that, there have been too many such incidents in Russia. Hillary Clinton said that in October of 2009. So Hillary Clinton is making statements defending this guy Khodorkovsky. Why would she do that? Why would she care? But see, that goes in line with the Khodorkovsky was prosecuted for these tax crimes in Russia. Then you have Senate Resolution 322, which is kind of an interesting number because if you look at the skull and bones, you'll find what number? 322. So is that a coincidence? I don't know. But anyway, Senate Resolution 322 was passed in support of Khodorkovsky, and it was, and I'll put the links in the show notes, but the co-sponsors, it was co-sponsored by John McCain and then Senator Barack Obama.
So I wonder if the United States had a sovereign wealth fund to buy assets from Russia. I'm sure. I remember when I was listening to the testimony of Broward after he did a deal with a fishing fleet or something that he bought. He came back and told Wall Street, supposedly his friends on Wall Street, that they could buy all of Russia for $10 billion. And so I think everybody in Washington, D.C. probably got involved in a hedge fund, wealth fund, something. So they're all invested, which is why for years and years they saw no evil in terms of globalization. Just didn't see it. It's just a wonderful thing, because they're all making money. Members who went into Congress with just an average amount of money at the time left as multimillionaires. And how does that happen on a government salary, It doesn't.
Yeah. Well, this Senate Resolution 322 was passed in support of Khodorkovsky when he was in prison. And as I said, it was Barack Obama and John McCain came together and supported, co-sponsored that legislation. So you got to ask yourself the question: why would they care about this guy Khodorkovsky? Why was he so important? And it's also interesting that Khodorkovsky also has ties to Bush and the Carlyle Group. There was an article in the New York Times, November 5th, 2003, called Autumn of the Oligarchs. And it says, then last summer, Mr. Khodorkovsky courted ExxonMobil and Chevron Texaco, hoping to sell a large chunk of Yukos. The deal, for as much as $20 billion, billion with a B, would have ensured the company's future. It would have also made Russia one of the West's primary sources of non-Arab oil. Washington took the bait. In September, George H.W. Bush came to Moscow to give a speech at a dinner held by the Carlyle Group, one of the world's richest private equity funds. Rumors still swirl as to the real reason behind the dinner, but this much is known. Mr. Khodorkovsky, who now sits in Moscow's Matryoshkaya Tishina prison, and that was back in, as I said, that was 2003, that the article, he's not in there anymore. But he also sits, according to the New York Times now, this is their article, he also sits on a Carlyle advisory board with the Secretary of State under Mr. Bush, James A. Baker III. At the same time, Mr. Khodorkovsky went on a charitable spree in Washington. Some recipients now prefer anonymity, but a partial list of his beneficiaries ranges from foundations to think tanks to the Library of Congress. In 2003, the National Book Festival, beloved project of Laura Bush, received $100,000 in donations from the foundation. Along the way, Mr. Khodorkovsky met Condoleezza Rice and Vice President Dick Cheney, by the way, who also sits on the Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Energy. They don't mention that, but I will. And even had his photograph taken with the President and the First Lady. So this is a tangled web, Vicky. He has ties to George Soros. Uh-huh. As a matter of fact, he named his charitable organization the Open Russia Foundation. And he admits that he and George Soros have funded some projects together.
Right.
He lobbied, and he lobbied for the Magnitsky Act through Colbert. And I got some other notes on that I can share. But Mikhail Khodorkovsky is a close associate with Bill Browder.
Yeah. Well, if you're traveling in the circles of there was a PBS special a number of years ago where they talked about the commanding heights, and that's a great term for it. If you are traveling in the circles of the commanding heights and you understand the long-term strategic objective and you know where the sources of information are so that you can exploit the tactical areas that they've established in order to achieve the long-term strategy, then the world is your oyster. You can, the world is yours, and that's what Khodorkovsky exploited, and that's what George Herbert Walker Bush exploited. That's what all the deep state and the members in our government, they all exploited that because they knew where the centers of power were, the centers of decision making, so that they knew these areas where they could set about making money as nation states were being disintegrated.
Yeah, and we don't have a problem with people making money. I don't have a problem with rich people, per se.
I don't either, but that's not what we're talking about
exactly.
here. We're talking about
theft.
A global power takeover.
Yes, we're talking about theft. Theft of resources, theft of property, theft of land, theft of rights. For all the talk about democratic societies and blah, 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 they're robbing people of their democracy. I don't like the term democracy because it's mob rule, really. But but that's the terminology that is being used today to describe that the United States has to spread democracy around the world. But don't you dare have an election that we disagree with
it's third way democracy. It's not really democracy at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an overthrow.
Yeah.
And you have, Bill Browder. He was a U.S. citizen, gave up his citizenship, is living in London now because he didn't want to pay taxes here. He was born in Chicago. He's the grandson of Earl Browder, who was the leader of the Communist Party USA, and CEO and co-founder of Hermitage Capital. And he was one of the people that was helping to loot Russia. He set up shell companies over there, and they ended up raiding his office, and now he's a wanted man in Russia for tax fraud. But he is the key proponent of the Magnitsky Act, which we come back to because why is the Magnitsky Act important? It is an act that is being used to punish people and punish governments for doing nothing short of coming out, in opposition to people like Bill Browder and Mikhail Khodorkovsky. This is an organized crime situation, and it's under the guise of human rights because this guy Sergei Magnitsky, who Browder claims is his attorney, he's really was, even though Browder admitted under oath during a sworn deposition in 2015 that Magnitsky had never been to law school and had never got a law degree. But yet Browder refers to him as his attorney. In reality, he's his accountant. And Magnitsky went to prison because he was helping Browder. And he died in prison. And now since then, Browder has been exploiting his death to promote this humanitarian narrative, which he's using to get laws like the Magnitsky Act, the Global Magnitsky Act, passed, which punishes people who, like from Russia. For instance, Vanessa, what is her name? The woman who was in the Trump Tower meeting, Natalia Veselnitskaya.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, she was sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. She's barred now from entering the United States because of the Magnitsky Act. And so she can't come here to defend herself from charges, false allegations and charges under the Magnitsky Act. She's not able to operate here anymore. And that's what they do. They bar people from traveling the United States. They take away their passport if they have one, and refuse to issue them one if they don't, if they apply for one. And if they get any money in the possession of in the reach of the United States, they'll seize it. So they could put people completely out of business from doing any business with the United States. And the problem is it's not just the United States. This is the issue. Browder is shopping this Magnitsky Act around to other countries as well. He's getting global Magnitsky Acts passed in other countries too, so that people in the United States,
global governance.
Well, for the purpose of, like if the Magnitsky Act doesn't apply to somebody here in the United States, but if it was in another country, it would apply because it's foreigners. So the idea is to get it passed in as many countries as you can, and then it can apply globally because you just get the sanctions issued in whatever country you want. This is organized. I'm telling you, this is nasty stuff.
It is organized crime. Do you have that clip that I gave you where that guy in 1993 mentioned third way? The Russians talking about.
I do. I'll tell you what. Which let me go down here for a minute, because there's some other things. I have to find it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I messed up your sequence. But it's so important because I realized in hearing that third way was being discussed in Russia in 1993.
Are you talking about the Democratic Leadership Council thing?
Yeah. And Well, no, I don't know if it's Democratic Leadership Council. I forget which video it was, but anyway, it wasn't really Third Way wasn't really introduced here until about 1996, 1997. So if they were talking about it in Russia in 1993, what that says to me is that it was the progression. First there was communism, then there was socialism, and now we're on the Third Way. And with the third way is management of the economy and people through information systems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a technocratic tyranny. It is.
Yes.
I'll tell you what. I got the audio you're talking about. I would like to do something just before that, and then we can get to that. Because where I want to go with this, there's been a recent revelation. You know, we know that WikiLeaks has put out a lot of very important stuff. And a lot of the stuff pertains to the types of things which we're connecting dots with now. You know, because a lot of the stuff involving Hillary Clinton's emails and a lot of the communications with the Russians and things like that, Ukraine correspondence, well, a lot of this stuff has been released by WikiLeaks. So Julian Assange is sitting over there in Belmarsh prison right now, and he is a political prisoner, and his health is failing as a result of a lot of the stuff that WikiLeaks has put out. They want to even with him. They do not want him talking. And my concern about all of this is that he doesn't have fair. Well, let me just put it this way: it's very questionable, the representation that he has. And let me just say this. Lucy Komisar, she's an investigative journalist who reports on international money laundering schemes. She's done a lot of reporting on the Bill Browder stuff as well, and the Magnitsky Act. She recently did an interview on fault lines with Nixon and Stranahan, okay, which I still maintain is the best foreign policy show on radio today. It's on Radio Sputnik because they have freedom on Radio Sputnik to say what they want and get the message out. So, you know, a lot of people would use that to marginalize them. Well, that's a Russian radio. Well, you know what? When you can't get the real truth from the American media, you go where you can. And the point is, you can check out anything they say. You know, it's all out there, documentable. If you got the gumption, but to just call somebody, and it's like calling somebody a racist. You know, when you do that, that's the lowest form of argumentation that you can use. Name calling, and I look at that in that same category. Well, you're a Russian bot. You're a Russian radio. Well, okay, fine. You want to call me that? Fine. Now, what else do you have? You know, what else do you have? Because can you say anything against what I'm saying? Can you make a counter argument other than, you know, to call somebody a name? So that's what I look at. But anyway, she was on the Fault Line show, and she talked about one of her recent articles dealing with the alarming conflicts of interest among Julian Assange's legal defense team. These are bombshell revelations, Vicky. She starts off talking about how she stumbled into these things, looking into a couple of reporters that were promoting the Browder narrative, and then the whole thing began to unravel. Listen to what she says.
When I saw a London Times op-ed written by two British lawyers promoting the Browder-Magnitsky hoax, so I looked into them. One of them is Ben Brandon, and it turns out, one of the lawyers in a London network and the spokes of that network linked both to Browder and to Julian Assange. First, here's how the British legal system works. Lawyers are either solicitors who work with clients or barristers who go to court in cases assigned by the solicitors. And to share costs, they operate in chambers, which provide office space, conference rooms, dining halls, clerks who get messages, sign cases, and other support staff. And there are over 200 chambers in London. They're not partners sharing profits, but they operate in a fraternal way. One of the people, Brandon, is in a law firm, Mishkan Dereya, and the person who was his co-author is in Matrix. His name is Alex Balin. He's in Matrix Chambers. And as I said, that they were promoting the fake Magnitsky Act, that this was an accountant who handled, but that this was a lawyer. He's really the accountant handling Browder's tax evasion. But look further. So we find out Balin in Matrix Chambers, that was founded by the wife of Tony Blair, the former neocon Labour British Prime Minister. And he is in the Browder camp. He represented Leonid Nevzlin, a partner of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who's a Browder collaborator, and who paid $385,000 lobbying for the Magnitsky Act. He had to file that with Foreign Agents Registration Act. And the suit was about money that Russia lost by the nationalization of Yukos oil, which Khodorkovsky had gotten in a rigged auction. Now, but there is another interesting connection. That's the connection of one guy. The other guy is Brandon of Mishkan Dereya. The day after the extradition request targeting Julian Assange, demanded by the Americans, was signed by the UK Home Secretary, Brandon, representing the U.S. government, opened the extradition case. So here's a guy who writes an op-ed about promoting the Browder hoax, and he is working for the U.S. government on the extradition case.
Now that's pretty weird, isn't it? But here's where it really starts to get weird. Listen to what she says next.
But then here's another interesting connection. So Balin, I indicated, is a member of Matrix Chambers. Another member is Mark Summers in Matrix Chambers. He is representing Julian Assange. So he's representing Julian Assange. Let's look for another link of Mark Summers. He's acting for the U.S. government in a major extradition case. This involves executives of Credit Suisse that accused of making fake loans and getting kickbacks from the Mozambique government. So here is an interesting network, and I wonder if Assange and the people who care about his interests know about this. Also connected here, Balin is representing Andrew Pierce, who's one of the Credit Suisse bankers. The U.S. government, represented by Summers, is seeking to extradite. Now, that's a very complicated web here, to me, of interests that cross each other. Now, there's another chamber where the two members are each supporting both Browder and Assange. Jeffrey Robertson is the founder of Doughty Street Chambers. He's a longtime Browder Magnitsky story promoter. He's promoting a Magnitsky Act in Australia, which would ban people, basically, that Browder tells them are the bad guys in Russia. And he served Browder in a UK court. There was an inquest into the death of Alexander Perepelichny, and Browder said that he had been killed by the Russians because he was helping Browder on his various cases accusing Russians of criminality. In fact, what happened was he had been working for a guy in Russia who seemed to have been getting money illicitly, and he was investing it, and he lost it, and he fled the country because the guy he was working for was not happy, and he went to Browder because he needed some protection, and he gave Browder documents from this guy that related to this client's questionable bank transfers. And then he died after a jog, and Browder invented the story that he was poisoned by a rare botanical substance, which obviously had to be ordered by Putin, but the forensic test found that untrue. And Robertson accused the police of a cover-up. But he is also a legal advisor to Assange, and he is interviewed by the international media about the case.
Okay, so recapping so far, we've got Balin in Matrix Chambers with Mark Summers, who's representing, and I put that word in quotes, representing Assange, and who's working for the U.S. government in other extradition cases. You got Jeffrey Robertson, founder of Doughty Street Chambers, these chambers, these legal chambers in Britain that these lawyers are a part of, which operate kind of as a fraternity type of situation and cost-sharing measure. Anyway, this Jeffrey Robertson, totally connected with Browder, but he's also a legal advisor to Julian Assange as well. Now, then she turns to Jeffrey Robertson's legal partner, Jennifer Robinson, who son of a gun, what are the odds? She's also representing Julian Assange.
So let's look at his partner in Dowdy Street. That's Jennifer Robinson. Now, she is she's a top lawyer for Assange. She also has a Browder connection. She is acting for Paul Radu. He's a journalist, an official of the OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and they are Browder collaborators. Browder recently has given them the Magnitsky Award for his collaborators. And Browder admitted in a deposition that they prepared the documents he gave the Justice Department on this fake accusation of the son of a Russian railway official, he says, received money from a Russian treasury fraud. So again, there's the connection. She's connected to the OCCRP, an acolyte and partner of Browder, and also she represents Assange. She's the longest-serving member of the Assange legal team. So why did Assange or his advisors choose lawyers associated with the interests of the U.S. government and Browder? It raises questions about how they are handling that defense.
What do you think so far? I got one more clip from her, but what do you...
Well, I'm going to have to go back and listen and look up each one of those people and see what I can find out. It sounds really interesting.
Well, it doesn't sound very good.
It's hard to follow.
Yeah, I understand it's hard to follow the names. It doesn't sound very good for Julian Assange, that's for sure.
No, it doesn't.
And you got to ask yourself, how in the world did he get so-called legal representation with this crowd of people? Who chose his legal counsel, and why? That's the question everybody should be asking. It sounds to me like the fix is in. And Vicky, if that wasn't bad enough, finally she turns her attention to the judge in the Assange case. And there's a conflict of interest there, too.
The judge, Emma Louise Arbuthnot, began presiding over the Assange case in 2017. And then she ruled that a full hearing would begin next February to consider the request for extradition. She appointed a district judge to rule on the case, but she is the supervising legal figure in the case. And according to the UK courts, the chief magistrate is responsible for supporting and guiding the district judge colleagues. But judges have to say if there are conflicts of interest. She has not done so. Her husband, James Arbuthnot, is a longtime Conservative Party politician. He has links to the British military and intelligence, including to former officials in UK intelligence, which WikiLeaks exposed in its publications and which conducted intelligence operations in the UK against WikiLeaks. So until last December of 2017, Arbuthnot, the husband, was one of 3 directors of a private security firm, SC Strategy, along with the former director of MI6, John Scarlett, and with Alex Carlile, who was the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation in the years 2001 to 11. And this company was formed to provide strategic advice on U.S. public policy. And Arbuthnot, until June of this past year, was a senior consultant. So it turns out that recently, after the report, the Maverick report, the WikiLeaks lawyer, Jen Robinson, we just talked about, was at an event in Australia. And she was asked by somebody in the audience about this conflict of interest by the magistrate, Emma Arbuthnot. And she said, well, yes, there was some controversy about her sitting on the case. She won't be sitting on it going forward. She was not sure who would take over. But that is dissembling. Arbuthnot was not sitting on the case. She was supervising the case, and she still is supervising the case. So why is Jen Robinson trying to throw attention off the fact that the magistrate overall over this case has a big conflict of interest because of her husband connected to a company, and to a company that has connected to WikiLeaks' own revelations in its documents. That's a real conflict of interest, and it shouldn't be covered up by Jen Robinson, supposedly acting in the best interest of Assange. It should be raised.
So there it is. I mean, can we expect Julian Assange to actually have any remote chance of ever getting a fair shake when he's surrounded by people who are conflicted? And that's the best way of saying it.
Right. And I'm wondering, where are the people who should be helping Assange? I wish I could do something. I can't, but
the only thing I know to do
there
is
should be like there was for Tommy Robinson. You remember how big the movement was for Tommy Robinson?
Mm-hmm.
But on Julian Assange, it's crickets out there.
Well, there are some people that are raising hell about it, but there's certainly not being given any attention by it's just kind of like our show. We're off in a corner kind of talking to ourselves and penetrating the mass media. They pretty much ignore you until they have to deal with you, and then they do everything they can to discredit you.
Uh-huh.
And
that's true.
So that's par for the course. But I thought it was important to raise this issue because it's easy to forget about Julian Assange, just like it's easy to forget about the Skripals. You remember the Skripals? Where are the Skripals? This couple that were, the guy was a CIA agent. They were supposedly poisoned with Novichok. Yes. This was all done, I guess, to blame Russia. And yet they kept changing the story. I mean, first it was he was poisoned by the Novichok in the ventilation system. Then it was in a park or in a restaurant, and it was on a doorknob. I mean, he got poisoned so many different ways. They did, and now where are they? They've effectively been disappeared. Where are they? We don't know where they are.
It's true. Yeah, they were world news for a while, and then they're gone.
Yeah, it just was, and then we find out that Novichok, that could only have been made in Russia. And then we find out that there was a plant nearby that had the capability right there in Britain.
In the neighborhood.
Yeah, right there in the neighborhood. And we're laughing at it, but really it isn't funny because this is how propaganda works. And that's what the people don't realize is they're being propagandized every day. So, anyway, moving along here, you wanted to get into the third way, and we had the World Affairs Council. Was that the one you were talking about, the World Affairs Council? They held a discussion in February of 1993.
Yes.
Which featured the founder of the East-West Security Institute.
Yeah, John Mroz. M-R-O-Z.
He's got an odd name. M-R-O-Z, John Mroz, or Mroz. He's talking about the 1993 Russia and the Russian economic calamity that was going on in 93. Hey, it's almost like we got a theme here. The Russian economic calamity that was going on in 93 and Russia's culture of organized crime. He mentioned in this meeting that the Russians' taste of democracy was in jeopardy, and that the United States, specifically Strobe Talbott, which is kind of interesting because Strobe Talbott goes all the way back to the beginning with the Clintons. Strobe Talbott was actually Bill Clinton's roommate at Oxford. A lot of people don't know that, but anyway, it's interesting that Strobe Talbott is mentioned, and in fact he. With all the looting that was going on in Russia, he developed a plan, Vicky.
A plan, okay.
A plan to deal with Russia in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and because he, at the time of this meeting, it was like 93. The following year, he would go on to become the Deputy Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, and so he was in a position to kind of help implement his plan, his strategy. He as I said, the Western strategy to deal with Russia. At the outset of this clip, he mentions the CIS, and I believe that would be the Commonwealth of Independent States, I believe is what that stands for.
Let's talk about the CIS, particularly Russia. You all know about hyperinflation. There's no question now that we can stop playing the masquerading game. Is it, it's 1,300%, and, well, hyperinflation is really, 1,500%? That now has stopped. Everyone admits that they have hyperinflation. A huge net outflow of capital. 97% of the population, according to Russia statistics, live below the poverty level now. There is what's called the culture of lawlessness, which the Russians themselves talk about, which is very, very worrisome to them. And this gets into the issues of corruption and organized crime, which we can talk about in the Q&A period, but which are among the most serious problems which Russia faces, and which may explain its corruption and organized crime and the culture of lawlessness, which in my view may explain why democracy will lose, at least for the short run, in the near future in Russia. And I'll talk about that. The health crisis. You look at the situation of the health crisis, whether it's the fact that more than half of the school children in Moscow have lice in their hair today as we speak, to much more serious issues of malnutrition, particularly for the young, and horrendous conditions for the elderly. And it's not just Russia. Look at Armenia. You can read in the papers, in the Washington Post and others, about the situation in Armenia, where they're in hospitals with no heat and they're trying to have surgery and the rest. This is widespread, and this is what's going on. But those are things you know about. And there's ethnic cleansing there, too. You know that in the Caucasus and in Georgia and Abkhazia and these areas. But you read about that. Let me talk to you a little bit about some of the other things that are going on that concern me. One is that the very limited experience that Russia has had in recent years with democracy, I believe, is very, very much in jeopardy. What is happening is very, very much a revolutionary situation in Russia today, in my view. What I'd like to talk a little bit about is, now what do we do about it? The Western strategy. And some of you may have seen, I'm sorry again, Frank, but I'm going to hold up the New York Times. This one on front page today, I don't know if any of you saw this, but the main article, the right-hand column top, is the U.S. will draw up a strategy to aid ex-Soviet states. And one of the things that it says in here is that the administration has decided that a new strategy is needed, and that Mr. Strobe Talbot is reported to have said that he is going to advocate an aggressive diplomatic campaign to promote reform and reduce the threat of nuclear weapons.
Okay, so it's Strobe Talbot developing the plan for Russia back in 1993, and as we've already said, Strobe Talbot was Bill Clinton's roommate at Oxford. He oversaw this looting of Russia during the 90s. And I would ask, was that the plan? Was that the part of the strategy that he developed?
Breaking nation states.
Absolutely. And they did a very, very good job
Objective.
Until Vladimir Putin came along. Sounds like I'm a big Putin fan, but to be honest with you, I think Vladimir Putin has more integrity than many of the clowns we have in our government at this point in time, and that's a sad commentary.
Uh-huh.
If I had to vote, I think I would vote for Putin over many of the politicians that we have here in the United States. At least he's trying to represent his own people.
Yeah, he stepped up to save his country. That's precisely what he did. And what the fact that we were in a Cold War with Russians, for 40 years, set that aside and just look at it strictly from the point of view of a nation state and a patriot. Putin is a Russian patriot.
Yes.
And he stepped up to save his country. And for that,
he's got to be torn down and villainized.
No matter what else, I would have to admire him for doing that.
Yes.
Because he didn't have to do that. Same way that Trump...
No, he could have taken the Boris Yeltsin way. And rolled out the red carpet for the people that were stealing the people in Russia blind. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much what Boris Yeltsin did. Anyway, continuing on. I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to say about that. I got more audio.
Did you get to the part? I didn't hear the part where he talked about third way.
Yeah, we're going to get there later on in the discussion. During the question and answer session, Morose commented about what was the agenda for Russia, what the real strategy for the future of Russia is.
John said several things which sounded rather gloomy and perhaps even worrisome in the course of his earlier remarks about the prospects for democracy in the short run, and in fact made something of a prediction that democracy will in fact lose in the short run. What is the life expectancy of the Yeltsin regime, if that's what you mean by democracy, and what do you see coming after Yeltsin?
Well, I think it's hard to make predictions. Again, I try to stay away from personalities because I think, again, as Americans, we tend to be so focused on the personality of the leader. that there's much more to what it stands for and what's there. The Russian people do not, the majority of the Russian people, I firmly believe, do not want to go back to communism. But they also find the current situation, for most people, much more intolerable than what they had before. So they are willing to try just about anything. In fact, there's lots of talk in the streets about the third way. What is the third way? How do you do it? What is this new thing that maybe Russia has to pioneer? It's almost sort of that spiritual quest that you find in Turgenev and Oblomov in Russian literature. I think in the short run, and by the way, personally, I believe that if the West is smart and if we play our cards right, that we don't have to see this as a loss. That in the short, if we're prepared to take a long-term view, we're prepared not to overreact quickly and abruptly as we go through these ruts. And the ruts are going to happen in other places. We had a situation just in Hungary a few months ago where there were some near hysterical writings in the paper that Westerners shouldn't invest in Hungary because this deputy head of one political party made these statements. He was roundly voted down in the party Congress this past month. So we tend to sort of overreact to things, and I think this is a long, difficult, complex, and painful process. I think Boris Yeltsin has been, like Gorbachev ahead of him, absolutely instrumental in the democratic process and movement towards market economy, and also towards making Russia a responsible member of the international community. And I think that all of these things are things where we're going to have to live with some ups and downs, but I don't think Russia has to become an enemy again. I don't believe that it's going to become a threat to us if we play our cards right. On the other hand, could Russian chauvinistic nationalism emerge? Could it become a fascist state or another leftist state or what? Of course it's possible. So I think the answer here is for us to have a strategy that's flexible enough, that answers some basic questions and takes these things into concern, but which also we stand by our values, but we're willing to be a little bit more patient than normally we are.
I love that term, chauvinistic nationalism.
Well,
chauvinistic nationalism.
Yeah, if you look at the Helsinki Final Act under the basket of items of cooperation under the heading of human dimension, you'll see that all of those social justice things are there. Chauvinism, racism, just the whole list, of the social justice. I tend to put that stuff out of my mind because it makes me sick. Yeah. But the whole victimology thing, everybody's a victim. Mm-hmm. And so they just attach labels, to describe a particular group of victims. It's a very effective tool against the larger society.
Absolutely, and that's why it's widely used today in today's social justice warrior landscape.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got victims everywhere you turn now.
Yeah. Well, and we're a nation of victims, and the main economy is beggary. Everybody's begging in one way or another. Mm-hmm. On the internet, on the TV, how the TV, they present the victims like, oh, the poor animals, give us money to take care of these homeless animals. And I mean, it's just, it's overwhelmingly nauseating to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's sad.
But that's become the paradigm of the socialist paradigm of the United States. And people are, especially the younger people, are accepting it as the normal way that things are.
Yeah.
If you need something, just ask, and you'll get it.
You got all these, GoFundMe things now everywhere. Mm-hmm. GoFundMe. I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, going back to the third way,
yes.
that the third way is the key, because it was presented to us. It was an initiative of the Democratic Leadership Council, which was kind of a branch that took over the Democratic Party. It was the technocrat branch aligned with the tech industry that took over the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
And they presented third way as a new way of governing.
Yeah.
And Clinton's whole reinvention of government was based on third way principles, which is really nothing more than an IT person's conception of the maximum use of technology to manage society. And while they're managing society, they're managing the lives of people as well. Yeah. And that's what the third way is, and it is the third edition of communism.
Yeah, as I look at it, it's kind of a blending of communism and capitalism together. You know, communism, capitalism, two dialectics, two opposing dialectics, and the clash of the two systems, the two dialectics, brings about the third, the synthesis, you know, of the third way. It's a it's like the Hegelian dialectic: thesis, antithesis, and then you have the synthesis through the conflict of the two arguments. And
one of the articles that I wrote called Third Way to Socialism, I have links to about 4 programs around the year 1999 that the DLC did on C-SPAN, where they talk about the third way, and it really is a program of the Socialist International, who are really communists. You know, I don't buy into the there's a difference between communism and socialism. It's just that they changed their marketing materials is all, you know, rather than the hardcore using
well, they don't want to use the word communism.
Military and police to push people around. Socialism may be a little softer and nicer, but the objective is the same.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with third way.
Mm-hmm.
Except that they're using IT systems to control people.
Yeah, to enforce the authoritarian rule, basically. Yes. Yeah, now, then we go to the Democratic Leadership Council in April of 1999. From the, you know, they're talking about what they've accomplished. Now, as I recall, we played an audio clip from this particular thing before, where they were actually talking about being democratic socialists.
Massimo, the leader of the Italian government at the time, I can't say his name.
Yeah, that guy. Anyway, he was
that guy.
He was, they all had a good laugh about it and everything. It's so funny that we're all a bunch of democratic socialists. But this the Democratic Leadership Council, they're talking about what they've accomplished, and then he introduces. So he starts off with a few things that they've accomplished. Then he passes it on to Bill Clinton. I've tried to shorten some of these clips as much as I can. The problem is that it's not easy, especially like earlier we played Lucy Komisar. Everything that woman said was important, so it's very difficult to break it up. But anyway, regarding the Democratic Leadership Council, as I said, he starts off talking about what they've accomplished, then they throw it to Bill Clinton, and he talks about where they want to go.
Whether they're called New Democrats, New Labor, or the New Middle, the values, ideas, and approaches to governing of the Third Way are modernizing center-left politics around the globe. They are grounded in a public philosophy that embodies fundamental progressive principles furthered by innovative ideas and modern means. The Third Way philosophy can be summarized this way. Its first principle and enduring purpose is equal opportunity for all, special privilege for none. Its public ethic is mutual responsibility. Its core value is community. Its outlook is global. And its modern means are fostering private sector economic growth, today's prerequisite for opportunity for all, and promoting an empowering government that equips citizens with the tools they need to get ahead. To lead our discussion, I'm honored to turn the program over to the man whose leadership has shaped the Third Way, the President of the United States.
At our last luncheon, one of the members made a crack that we had 5 members of the last Politburo of the Soviet Union sitting around our table today. And another one said, yes, and a lot of the rest of us should have been on the Politburo, but we weren't. And it was a picture of how much the world has changed. What gives rise to this kind of politics? When the old order is destroyed, or when the realities of daily life or popular dreams can no longer be accommodated by a given set of political arrangements or a political debate. You heard Al Fromm say that our lodestars have always been in the United States the concept of opportunity, responsibility, and community.
Okay, I want to hold it right there since we got the break. We'll continue that here on the other side of the break. Stay with us, folks. This is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. Hour number 3 is straight ahead. Please don't go away.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the third and final hour of Govern America. Vicky Davis is here. I'm Darren Weeks. As we continue on here in this third hour on the 30th of November, 2019, and it's going to be one more month, and we're going to have to get used to saying 2020. I just can't believe how fast the time goes.
Oh boy, I know.
2020 will be right around the corner. And the plan, the communitarian plan for totalitarian control, was supposed to be fully implemented by 2020. And here we are in the 21st century, even though internet censorship has exploded in a massive way. They've done everything they can to try to put the genie back in the bottle as far as the internet is concerned, and yet here we are still able to have conversations and stream and distribute things among platforms, even though those platforms have become very, very censorship-oriented. It's an overwhelming... we've had an explosion of awareness, and that's the thing that really is encouraging in recent days. I think the other side is kind of miscalculated in some respects. They have moved a little too quickly in other respects, and as a result, they've enabled a large segment of the population to wake up. And I think a lot of this, too, has to do with the fact that you've got so much crazy going on today in the media. The media has done a very good job of exposing itself.
Yeah, well, that's the irony of the whole thing, is that the tool that they counted on to have global governance,
the brainwash,
is the same tool that can bring them down.
Yeah,
so and I use it. I think probably to the best advantage that I can figure out, which is to do the research, post articles, talk about it, as best that I can.
Mm-hmm.
And because and there really has been a great awakening, I'd say, in the last 5 or 6 years. It's kind of been like a mushroom cloud of awakening.
Yeah, and it certainly has been certain destructive patterns regarding that as well. But
what's really important, what I think is important, is to be able to find the important institutions, the ones that are the thought leaders of this whole long-term global strategy, and expose them and help people understand find the way to find their documents so you can read it for yourself.
Yeah.
No, so you don't have to depend on me to tell you. You can go read it for yourself. And that's my objective, has been my objective all along.
Yeah, part of the reason why I do this program is because I'm hoping that something that we say will last through the annals of time, and some future generation will find some of these audio files or whatever you want to say, and it will educate them as to how they got where they are. Historical record is very important, Vicky. As you know, the people who win a war tend to write the history of the war, and accurate history, is very hard to find. And so when you can find something that really is a different perspective, it's of great value. And so we connect dots here every week on Govern America for that purpose. It's to try to show people, paint a picture, to form the picture that people aren't getting elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So before the break, we were talking about the Democratic Leadership Council and their meeting in April 1999. The reason why we're doing this is because it speaks to the third way, the implementation of the system that's being foisted upon the world, under the guise of community. And I want to come back to that word community in a moment. Community is not a bad word, people. And I see comments on the chat room, they can have their community word. Well, you know what? If you abandon everything that they hijack, then you're going to be abandoning everything good. Community is not a bad word. They are using it in a bad way. But community has historically been a good thing. People have come together for community, for a common purpose. Another phrase that they've hijacked. And that's, so are we to surrender all of our language to the controllers, to the globalists, to the people who want to use these things against us? I don't think we should. I think we should take back the narrative. That's my point. And I can go back into that little... I wrote an article in 2015 regarding that. And maybe after I play this audio, I'll go back and share a little of it with you, because I think it's important. But anyway, back to the audio of Bill Clinton.
Our lodestars have always been, in the United States, the concept of opportunity, responsibility, and community. But let me say, what could that mean in the present time? What is giving rise to all these people's elections? Why is this happening everywhere? It's not some blind coincidence. I believe it is because the social arrangements which were developed within countries and the international arrangements among them, which grew up from the Great Depression through the Second World War and then the Cold War, are no longer adequate to meet the challenges of the day. It seems to me that the great question that any political party that purports to represent ordinary citizens must answer is, how do you make the most of the economic possibilities of the global information economy and still preserve the social contract? What can governments do to help make sure that every responsible citizen has a chance to succeed in the global economy? And how can we discharge our responsibilities as the leaders of wealthy countries to put a human face on the global economy so that in other countries as well, no one who's willing to work is left behind? The second question I'd like to ask is, what is the nature of the social contract now? And how is it different from what it used to be? What does it mean? What are there entitlements that we should still have? Beyond entitlements, what are the empowerment issues of the social contract? What is the role of the private sector and the relationship of the government to it? And finally, what do we mean by the concept of community? Who's in, who's out? And how can we create a concept of both national and international community that is a more powerful magnet drawing people together than the awful magnets pulling them apart, rooted in racial and ethnic and religious difference throughout the world?
Okay, so that's Bill Clinton being a social architect, and that's what these people were doing, is planning society in the future.
Yeah, and they did establish an organization called the Community of Democracies. And I kind of have to disagree with you a little bit on the use of the word community, because there are far too many. If everybody understood that the word community is a word being used by socialists to mask their agenda, then I would say, yeah, it's okay to use the word community. But until everybody understands that, the word community makes me sick to my stomach, frankly.
Well,
because I understand what they're doing with it.
Yes, but they have perverted it. I mean, it's just like the word gay.
Yeah.
It's like the word gay. We've surrendered that word. Now you don't dare say you're gay, or people get the wrong impression. It's because we've surrendered these things to the other side that the other side is able to take and use the language, develop their own narratives. Let me just share a little. I wrote this article in 2015, and see what you think. You don't have to agree with me. But I started off talking about money because what really set me off, the reason why I started down this road back then, is because I kept seeing these public service announcements and these news anchors use the phrase "give back." We need to give back to the community, and it drove me nuts. I got really ticked off because I'm like, "What is this giving back business? The community hasn't done anything for me."
Other side of beggary.
Well, it's even deeper than that. Okay. So I started off talking about money. I'll skip those couple of paragraphs at the beginning. But I said, in ancient times, the Christian church was implored to come together in unity. The word that was used in Greek was koinonia, or koinos, meaning common. The word community is a derivative of two words, common and unity, both of which are good things, and which are necessary in order for societies to function. In its rightful place, a community is a group of like-minded individuals who choose to voluntarily unite and work together for a common purpose. There's nothing bad about this, and indeed it is what humanity has always done since the beginning of time for the sake of survival. It is important to point out that community, though considered a noun, and this is just me saying this, should really be seen as a verb. Community is something that individuals choose to do. By definition, you're not a community if you're not in unity for a common purpose. If an individual finds themselves no longer in union with the other members of his or her common unity, that person has the right to sever the relationship with others and can either work and live on their own or attempt to find another group of people with whom they can unite and join in their common unity. This is an individual liberty and recognizes one's God-given right to be their own king without subject. Today, this very valuable and necessary relationship between individuals is being perverted by social engineers and societal architects, one of whom you just heard from just a moment ago, Bill Clinton, through their doctrine of sustainable development. Academics like Amitai Etzioni, founder of the Communitarian Network, have redefined community, the historical relationship of individual choice and koinonia, and twisted it into a system of communitarianism, whereby the rights of the individual are trampled upon under the pretense of advancing the well-being of the whole. They are promoting a herd mentality versus an individually focused one. Instead of recognizing each individual in the community as a king without subject, with inherent, unalienable God-given rights, communitarianism views individuals as more as replaceable components or cogs that are a part of an overall unit. They have hijacked terms like common purpose and exploit them to promote their brand of groupism. Under this system, property rights and other freedoms are significantly curtailed, if not eliminated altogether. Laws become vague or non-absolute as community values, quote-unquote, often undefined, rule the day. It is a form of mob rule engineered from the top down. And I would also add they're using democracy in the same way. Democracy.
That's an excellent definition, by the way. I really like that.
Thank you. It is in this context that we find the concept of volunteerism also being perverted. Volunteering time to do something special for someone is an individual choice. By definition, it is not something that can be mandated. Once it is a requirement for high school graduation, college entry or commencement, career advancement or maintenance, social status, or for any other reason, it ceases to be volunteerism. Hence, there's no such thing as, quote, mandatory volunteerism, despite the terminology of uppity academics. Sorry, eggheads, just because you pride yourself on deconstructing society and breaking the threads that hold together the social fabric does not give you the right to change the meaning of words. I viewed a new public service announcement today, and that was back in 2015, which set me off, which shows a group of people planting a flower garden at a retirement home. Seeing this, I thought, what a nice thing for them to do. Making lives better for other people, especially the elderly, is wonderful. I do believe that at the end of our lives, the things that really matter are the good that we do for others. The group part of a 4-H, we're involving children in the process, which I think was also wonderful. Gets them off the couch, gets them involved in, gets them away from the electronic devices for a while. They get some exercise, valuable lesson of respecting their elderly, blah, blah, blah. The problem I have with the announcement is that they use the oft-repeated phrase, giving back to the community. It might seem like a small thing, but words have meaning. I know from experience that these phrases don't make their way into the vernacular by accident. I began hearing that phrase, giving back, years ago when I worked in the commercial television world. Our news anchors, themselves very involved in community relations and organizations, were using it anytime someone did a charitable act. Undoubtedly, these anchors were parroting what they had heard while participating in their various community organizations. Giving back implies an indebtedness for each member of the community. It implies that the community has done something for you, and therefore you owe the community your time, your free labor, and your money. I don't know about you, but I find this repugnant. The community has never done anything for me. Everything I've had to work to acquire. Whenever I've gotten into a jam, the community has not been there to rescue me. I've had to solve my own problems as an individual or with the help of close family. So what is this giving back to the community nonsense? There's some extremely rare instances when a high-profile tragedy, like somebody's house catches on fire or whatever, happens to someone. That individual, members of the community, then get together, raise funds, and help in some way. But for most of us, this isn't the case. Yet an indebtedness to the community, a nameless, faceless entity closely associated with government, is implied, which facilitates a not-so-subtle suggestion that if you don't give your time, your free labor, or your money for the benefit of the collective, then you are not doing your part and are therefore derelict. It also hints that you could be subject to some kind of ostracization at some point for your lack of generosity. Upon researching the origin of the phrase, Vicky, I was delighted to find that I was not alone in my being offended by the reference. There's an academic and self-described philosopher, Stephen Hicks, Ph.D. He even goes so far as to call it a false accusation. He says, and I quote, he says, there's more to it. The phrase also denies the benevolence of the giver. If you're only giving back what is rightfully someone else's, then you do not deserve any special praise for your action. Your benevolence need not be acknowledged or honored. So the phrase really is a double injustice. It implies that you do not deserve what you have, and it denies you any credit you deserve for your benevolent act. Or to put it abstractly, it is the imputation of an undeserved negative and a denial of the denial of a deserved positive. Now, Hicks traces...
That's really interesting, and I want to point out that that's what Bill Clinton was talking about in terms of third way, the social contract, and social responsibility.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what he was talking about. It's your responsibility to give back.
Absolutely. And this is where it comes from. He traces, Hicks does, this philosopher, this academic, who's a good academic, from what I've read of him. He traces the concept back to 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant and his lectures on ethics. Quoting again from Hicks, he says, Kant employs his standard distinction between inclinations and duties, arguing that actions done from inclination have no moral worth, while actions done from duty do. So if we apply this to acts of charity, charity done out of benevolence has no moral significance for Kant, while charity done out of duty does. But Kant asks, on what is the duty to be charitable based? Why ought we be charitable whether we want to or not? Kant's answer is that to give to charity to the poor, to give charity to the poor is to make good on past injustices. Think about this. Think about this in the context of today's social justice warrior movement. I think this is the root of everything that's going on today, Vicky.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, it implies that I'm, as an individual, responsible for everything that came before me.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, I have to pay penance.
You white privilege
for the sins of my father.
Absolutely, white privilege fits right into this too. Kant's answer is that to give to charity to the poor is to make good on past injustices. Here's the key quotation: In giving to a person in need of charity, the giver, quote, makes restitution for an injustice of which he is quite unconscious, though unconscious of it only because he does not properly examine his position. Although we may be entirely within our rights according to the laws of the land and the rules of our social structure, we may nevertheless be participating in general injustice. And in giving to the unfortunate man, we do not give him a gratuity, but only help to return to his, that of which the general injustice of our system has deprived him.
God.
Isn't that incredible?
Now I'm getting mad.
For if none of us drew to himself a greater share of the world's wealth than his neighbor, there would be no rich or poor. Even charity, therefore, is an act of duty imposed upon us by the rights of others and the debt we owe to them, unquote. That is Immanuel Kant in his Lectures on Ethics, page 194. So, continuing with Hicks, he says, here we have the first part of the giving back claim made explicit, the zero-sum assumption that the consequence implication that one is merely returning something one has borrowed or stolen. On the very next page, Kant makes explicit the second assumption of giving back. Quote, a man ought not to be flattered for his acts of charity, lest his heart swell with generosity and desire to make benevolence the sole rule of his conduct. Oh my gosh, what a horrible thing that would be if we had a whole lot of people actually being generous.
Yeah.
This is crazy. But I'm convinced, Vicky, this is the source of all this social justice warrior bullcrap we're always dealing with.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm absolutely sure it is. And it's interesting that the guy who is credited with third wave philosophy is a sociologist who is a professor at the London School of Economics. So there you go.
Finishing up this article, I've got a few more paragraphs to go. I said, hence, it appears that contemporary societal architects have embraced the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and the benevolent act of giving has been perverted to become an obligation. With this understanding as a basis, what then are the ramifications when we hear phrases such as social justice being bandied by high-profile officials with fancy titles? What are the ramifications for our elderly? Public policy increasingly views them as a liability to society instead of an asset. The engineered decline in the availability of health care leads to the promotion of euthanasia, which I predict will someday become the duty to die, as older people are viewed as a drain on the quote-unquote system. Will euthanasia be considered a charitable act once one takes upon themselves as a final act to give back to their community when they have nothing else to give? It has never been clear what is meant by the term human resource. So That's the article, Giving Back the Communitarian Death of Benevolence. I'll put it in the show notes. But I just thought it was an important thing to at least broaden the conversation a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, it fits right in with the third way philosophy, which is that you basically don't really deserve anything, so you should give it back.
And doesn't this dovetail beautifully with communism and this socialist and the third way idea that they're pushing?
In one of those videos, I think it was the first one that I have in that article that I wrote, that it will be in the show notes, Bill Clinton was talking about how we need to share everything that we have with people all across the world.
Yeah.
You know, we just give up everything, and that is the philosophy that they have been using, you know, in these so-called trade agreements, is basically using our economy as a bargaining chip. I mean, in these negotiations to establish an international system of law.
Yeah. So in Agenda 21, you know, we're dealing with technology transfer. We're dealing with, you know, the largest. We talked a lot about how we built China up at the expense of the American middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's being done is to level the playing field worldwide. You know, and it's not lost upon me. I bring up communist Alger Hiss and his founding of the United Nations. You know, so you have the UN promoting this global communist philosophy of transferring wealth, technology to the so-called developing countries from the developed countries. It's international socialism.
Yes.
On every level.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I realized in the research that I've been doing over the past week on the Helsinki Commission, can't remember what. Oh, I got an article in my email box about Ukraine. Ukraine being the center of, I guess you could say it's the last area that divides East and West, you know, from the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why there's a fight over the Ukraine. But the negotiations, what we've called trade agreements, in Europe, those negotiations were done by the Helsinki Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it the same way as with trade rounds. They have meetings on different issues in different cities, working on a plan of action at each meeting. And I realized that in 1989, and that was followed by the Malta Summit, George Herbert Walker Bush attended a summit with Gorbachev in Malta, and they made a number of agreements. Well, shortly after that, the Helsinki Commission finalized their work with the Charter of Paris, and then they started up a new organization to do the same thing in the Pacific, and that is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. And all of it is moving towards world government.
Yep, exactly. They're all pieces toward ultimate peace. And ultimate peace, by their terms, means nobody can fight back. Tell you what, we got the bottom of the hour break. Stay with us, folks. This is Govern America.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
All right, we're in the home stretch of the broadcast. One more half hour to go, and then we'll say goodbye to November. And it's just incredible how fast the time goes. GovernAmerica.com is the website. That's GovernAmerica.com. Vicky Davis's websites are thetechnocratictyranny.com and channelingreality.com. We've gotten into a lot of different topics today, including the implementation of the socialist third way system. I wonder if we can turn the corner real quickly, because there was a Senate hearing on national security threats that FBI Director Christopher Wray spoke at. Did you want to get into some of that in the last half hour, Vicky?
Sure. Let's go for it.
He was commenting on the activity of the Communist Chinese.
On the counterintelligence front, where the Chinese government is now targeting our innovation through a wider than ever range of actors. Not just Chinese intelligence officers conducting both traditional and cyber espionage, but people they enlist to help them, like contract hackers, certain graduate students and researchers, insider threats within U.S. businesses, and a whole variety of other actors working on behalf of China. We see the Chinese government encouraging and even assisting the abuse of incentive plans like the so-called 1,000 Talents program, plans that offer cash and other enticements to bring American information back to China, information that is often actually trade secrets and other innovations stolen from American companies and universities. And we're seeing Chinese companies then using that stolen technology to compete against the very American companies it belongs to. We're seeing intellectual property and data theft from companies and academic institutions of just about every size in just about every sector. This is a threat to our economic security and in many respects a threat to our national security. It's also a threat to American jobs, American businesses, American consumers, and it's in small towns and big cities alike. Even as we speak, even as I sit here testifying before this committee, the FBI has around 1,000 investigations involving attempted theft of U.S.-based technology that lead back to China. And that's involving nearly all of the FBI's 56 field offices, and I can tell you that number is representing a significant uptick from a few years ago, and it's growing.
That's one thing that really surprised me, is the fact that he said they have currently 1,000 active investigations going on with regard to the Chinese. That's pretty remarkable.
Well, it's remarkable to me that they're actually doing it, because for so many years it was just right out in the open.
We've been screaming about this.
I remember when I was working in Silicon Valley, they knew about industrial espionage back then. Mm-hmm. So it's nothing new, and that was the mid to late 70s.
Right.
So it's been going on for all this time, and then they sign on with the WTO, totally open up our economy, open for business, which meant open for theft.
Yep.
You know, come and take everything, because the third way communists want to share everything with everybody in the world. Somehow we must have oppressed the Chinese to keep them from developing all of the technology and stuff that we had.
It was our time to give back.
Give back.
We had to give back to the global community, including communist China. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? The biggest, what I'm wondering is, where were the Republican leaders when all of this was going on with the third way, the DLC, and the idea for the information society globally? Where were they?
They were
all making money.
They were taking out the contract on America. Wasn't that Newt Gingrich's thing?
Yeah, so this whole revolution has been a top-down thing, both Republicans and Democrats, and it's been a war against the common man. That's really what it is.
Which continues to this day. Here's Ohio Senator Rob Portman discussing Chinese activities in American universities. They're called Confucius Institutes.
I noticed in your opening statement, Director Wray, you talked about the 1,000 Talents program, and as you may know, the Permanent Subcommittee Investigations with Senator Carper and others, we're in the process of looking into that issue, and have done a series of hearings on related items, including on the Confucius Institutes. In fact, we did a Confucius Institute report that indicates that there are limitations that China places on the activities here, including censorship. As an example, not allowing the academic community here to discuss topics they believe are politically sensitive, such as, the Tiananmen Square uprising or something like that. But as you say, it goes well beyond Confucius Institutes. You said that China is abusing the Thousand Talents program. I wrote, you also said that the FBI has about 1,000 cases, coincidentally, investigating technology transfer. And you said that universities should be smarter about defending themselves. I guess my question would be, what efforts have the FBI taken to inform the higher education community about this threat, and what has your response been?
So I think you put your finger on an important issue. The role of academia in our country, especially given the amount of taxpayer-funded research there is in particular, is a key component to this counterintelligence threat. So in addition to investigations, and I can't give you the number out of the 1,000 that involve universities and in particular graduate students and researchers, but certainly it's a significant number. But in addition to the investigations, we're much more actively engaged with major universities in encouraging them and informing them so that they can take appropriate action voluntarily but robustly to guard against the threat. As far as the reaction we've gotten, it varies. But I've been actually quite encouraged by quite a number of universities which a few years ago would not have wanted to meet with the FBI under any circumstances, much less in the kind of partnership way that's occurring now, including very good responsiveness from Ohio State. I've met with them, and we had an academic summit in FBI headquarters just about a month ago where we brought in chancellors and others from universities all across the country, a whole bunch of our SACs, and kind of briefed them on some of the threats and had engagement about how we can work more constructively together to help them defend themselves.
Well, our information is that Ohio State certainly and some other schools have expressed their interest in working even more with you and appreciate what has been done. They also, I think, are not providing us the transparency we need to know whether there's a problem. Would you agree with that?
Well, I probably let Ohio State speak for itself in terms of its own transparency. But
I'm talking about Ohio State. I'm talking about just in general. We found out, as you may know, in our investigation as an example, that about 70% of the schools were not properly reporting the foreign government payments that they were receiving with regard to the Confucius Institutes. So the transparency, although it's some of it's in law already and not being followed, is not adequate in our view. Is that your view?
I think it's fair to say there's a lot of room for improvement, but we're seeing improvement.
Now, there's an article in the Daily Caller, which I'll put in the show notes, along with everything else that we cover today. But it's called U.S. Universities in the Crosshairs of a Chinese-Backed Recruitment Operation, Bipartisan Senate Report Finds. And they say in here that the China's Thousand Talents plan recruited thousands of academics to bring research from abroad to support its military and technology efforts, and multiple American colleges essentially shrugged when finding researchers in the act, a bipartisan Senate report found Monday. So again, that'll be in the show notes. But I just, every time this subject comes up, I think about Bill Kaufman, and him teaching over there at the University of Michigan and trying to bring attention to the fact that he was told, in fact, the university was bringing in delegations from Harbin Institute, which is the institute where the Chinese send their people to be trained for the People's Liberation Army. Delegations from Harbin Institute were being brought into the University of Michigan, and he was, Bill Kaufman, a rocket scientist who helped NASA perfect their nose cone technology on the rockets. He was told that he had to share, he was told to share his technology, his innovations, with these people from Harbin Institute. And he refused to do it. He said, I absolutely will not. And he went up the chain at the university, and ultimately he ended up being fired. His classes were canceled for his efforts. And he's testified before Congress years ago on this subject. And now, after all these years, finally, this thing is coming out. So, that harkens back to your earlier comments. It's kind of interesting. Why now?
Well, Christopher Wray, if you noticed, he kind of I don't know. I consider it equivocation. But the universities have played a major role in globalization, and particularly in the information systems. Okay, this morning on C-SPAN there were a couple of people that were talking about the government surveillance. You know, how the government has to work. They have to get warrants and stuff like that. The universities don't, okay? Mm-hmm. And our government has been massively funding these, quote, research programs at the universities. Well, those research programs all involve the technology and the network that the universities all belong to that is global. And so the surveillance systems in local communities, what I've called the conspiracy of the mayors, that there is a pattern whereby they recruit the mayor, the university recruits the mayor, and they start working together. They're implementing Agenda 21, and they are implementing locally the surveillance systems locally, but the information is not kept by the government, it's kept by the university. But it is accessible to the government, and so that's how they've been setting up the technocratic police state systems outside of the walls of the state, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Privatized surveillance is what it is.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. Another thing that was discussed was, and that kind of dovetails perfectly with this other aspect of this hearing, because with all the surveillance that we have, it seems like they can't avoid, they're trying to, we've talked often on the show about how they're trying to stop crime before it happens now. This whole concept, Minority Report type concept of pre-crime, which is very Orwellian, but they're making an effort now to put everything that way. So if you have a thought crime, if you are posting things on social media, all of this stuff is supposed to somehow make it possible to warn them that you're going to be violent or that you're going to pull some terroristic act. But the problem is it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and as evidenced by the fact it doesn't work, is you had a guy, if you remember, who went, one of these school shooters went on and said on social media and posted, he says, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." You remember that?
Yep, that was the kid in Florida.
Yeah, it was one of them in Florida, and anyway, so that was one of the things that was discussed, is this the FBI quote unquote failures regarding the Parkland shooting incident. And, he wasn't stopped. He's still able to carry out his actions. Anyway, this is Senator Scott Walker, who was the governor of Florida at the time. He's now a senator. He's drilling the FBI director on the subject of eGuardian, and the subject of fusion centers come up.
But I also have concerns with the failures that occurred before a series of shootings in Florida and the lack of after-action transparency on the part of the FBI. In the days following the senseless attack at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, I learned of repeated failures by the FBI to properly investigate and act on specific tips received about the shooter in the months leading up to the attack. Weeks before the shooting, a detailed warning about the shooter was received by the FBI National Call Center. The warning was never passed on to the South Florida Field Office for an investigation or to any state or local law enforcement. Months before that, the FBI was warned about the shooter through a comment on a YouTube video, which someone with the shooter's name stated that "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." I understand the FBI gets a high volume of tips, but it appears the FBI did nothing with this detailed information of an imminent threat. We're also aware of similar instances of pre-attack notifications received by the FBI regarding other attacks in Florida, including at the Fort Lauderdale Airport, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and the Tallahassee yoga studio. Since that time, I have repeatedly sought information from you, Director Ray, regarding the steps you've taken to hold accountable those within your agency responsible for those failures. I ask for two things. First, has anyone been held accountable? And second, What changes have been made to prevent this from happening again?
We've made extensive changes. I immediately, after the Parkland shooting, dispatched a large special inspection team into CJIS, which is where our public call center is. And as a result of that, a number of changes have been made. And without going into all the detail, let me just give you a few of the key points. First, we've increased staffing significantly, both at the line level and the supervisor level. Second, we've enhanced the training significantly. Third, we've enhanced the technology significantly. Fourth, we've added more oversight. Fifth, and this goes to parts of your question, we've put in place an entirely new leadership team with a wealth of experience. And we've made other personnel changes, some of them disciplinary in nature. You mentioned the volume issue. I think it's important for people to understand that on any given day, our call center up there gets more than 3,000 tips. Of those 3,000 tips, about 60 a day, that's 60 tips a day, are potential threats to life. So there's a huge amount of wheat having to get separated from the chaff there. Of the 60, probably about 80% of them have no federal nexus whatsoever. And so we're looking at ways, and I know that that's the goal now coming around to your legislation. That's a goal that I think we share, which is how can we get the right information, that's key word, the right actionable information, that wheat and not the chaff, to our state and local partners as fast as possible. And there's something that we have in place that I'd love to talk to you more about called eGuardian, which is a system that's been in place for a while that we've significantly enhanced. And the key takeaway from that, Senator, is that it would dual route. So simultaneously go straight from the call center, not just to the local field office, but also to the state fusion center or the equivalent. We've already had a number of instances, and I could go through a number of them here, where some threat comes in, and within hours, using that approach, within hours we've had an arrest.
So you got the fusion centers involved in the process, and it's interesting now that they just openly talk about all these fusion centers.
Mm-hmm.
But most people are completely unaware that local police departments in various regions of the United States are being federalized and have been federalized through these databases.
But it's the same thing I was talking about earlier. It's the cross-jurisdictional arrangements that remove the law, that remove the function from the geographic boundaries on which the laws of the United States are based. So if you have a regional police jurisdiction, they're out of the control of your mayor, your county officials. There is no authority to which they're really reporting, except maybe at the state level, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know, because I don't know what all the laws at the state level are geared towards the traditional land-based jurisdictions as well. Now, in Idaho, where what I call the Trojan Triangle that I researched, that did turn out ultimately to be a fusion center, but they created a special jurisdiction for them that is corporate and politic, and they could take EB-5 money. So they, they're letting the communist Chinese buy into the separate jurisdiction where the fusion center was located in connection with the university. So there you go.
Yeah, there's the whole setup right there. If they really care about national security, and forget this homeland security bullcrap. I mean, let's talk about national security. If they really care, then let's start with getting rid of the EB-5 visa program. Because allowing foreign governments and foreign people to buy their way, basically buy permanent residency for $500,000, is insane, especially from an espionage standpoint. Who's going to do the buying? It's going to be mostly people that want to get a beachhead into the country.
Right, that's exactly it. And why are they allowing foreign countries, behind the facade of a private business to buy up our critical infrastructure, like our energy grid. Why are they letting foreign companies buy our energy grid? Why are they allowing foreign companies to buy up our water? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. When you analyze everything logically, nothing makes any sense from the standpoint of what they say versus what they do.
Yeah. Well, the FBI has two programs, one of which I think was mentioned there, called eGuardian. eGuardian, the FBI website says, was developed to meet the challenges of collecting and sharing terrorism-related activities amongst law enforcement agencies across various jurisdictions. The eGuardian system is a sensitive but unclassified information-sharing platform hosted by the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division as a service on the Law Enforcement Enterprise Portal, or LEEP. The eGuardian system allows law enforcement agencies to combine new suspicious activity reports, or SARs, of incidents like these with existing SAR reporting systems to form a single information repository accessible to thousands of law enforcement personnel and analysts directly supporting law enforcement. The information captured in eGuardian is also migrated to the FBI's internal Guardian system, where it is assigned to the appropriate Joint Terrorism Task Force for any further investigative action. So that's eGuardian. There's also iGuardian, Vicky. iGuardian is the FBI's industry-focused cyber intrusion reporting platform. They say, with cyber threats continuing to emerge at the forefront of the FBI's criminal and national security challenges, engaging public-private partners in information exchange alongside law enforcement and intelligence communities is critical to bring trusted industry partners into the intelligence fold. Did you get that? To bring trusted industry partners into the intelligence fold, the FBI has adopted its Guardian threat tracking and management system to include iGuardian, a secure information portal allowing industry-based individual partners to report cyber intrusion incidents in real time. What we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about turning the corporate world into a snitch, an electronic snitch society.
Exactly. Yes.
The iGuardian portal is an evolution of eGuardian, the platform through which the FBI's law enforcement partners provide potential terrorism-related threats and suspicious activity reports. While eGuardian enlists law enforcement users, iGuardian was developed specifically for partners with critical telecommunications, defense, banking, and finance, and energy infrastructure sectors, and is available over the sensitive but unclassified InfraGard network. Comprising thousands of vetted, industry-aligned members nationally, InfraGard is the FBI's public-private infrastructure protection coalition. The organization maintains its own secure network to distribute FBI alerts and bulletins and allows sharing of key threat information across its membership. And who's a threat? Anybody they determine is a threat. We're all potential threats.
And that's the whole idea behind the system. It's a massive police state, and some people are on the inside. They are the ones that are selected to be partners, spies against the rest of the community, but they're in the community. I mean, it's so horrible. It's unbelievable that they could be doing this in the United States.
Yeah. And most people would just look at this and say, well, they should share information. I don't want to, just keep in mind what Benjamin Franklin said. They that can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
I have no problem at all with databases where they have criminals. Where they keep track of criminals so that if, they pull over somebody, they can find out that this person is like a 5-time felon and, violent crimes and all of that stuff. That's a good thing. But if they have people in there that have had just traffic tickets, that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. After 9/11, we said everybody's a terrorist in the war on terror. Mm-hmm. And that's the way they've made it. We're all suspects. If you draw a breath into your lungs, you are a potential domestic or international terrorist. But all this surveillance stuff, hey, look, we just had an attack on the London Bridge again. And somebody went and stabbed a bunch of people. Gee, I guess the surveillance network didn't work there, did it?
Yeah, pre-crime. Pre-crime failed.
Nor would gun control, by the way, because he used a knife. He didn't use a gun. He stabbed people. So, if one person had a gun over there, they could have stopped them. But anyway, never throw logic into the equation. Anyway,
absolutely.
We got to go. Thanks for being with us. Pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. God bless each and every one of you. And join us back here next week. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Darren.
All right, we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.